Chapter 60. The stranger in the cobalt suit snapped his fingers. "Tell me what you know about platinum the metal." Lagerfugel nudged his supervisor, known as D3. She snapped her fingers back at him a couple of times first. "Any particular reason?" Mr. Blue cleared his throat. "If we're investigating the platinum rapids, I'd like to know if there's anything significant about the metal itself, anything that makes it special." "Oh, you don't know off the top of your head, old man?" Sully asked. "Oh, I shot it." "It's noble," Don Rothlanders III offered. The retired Commodore looked over at the young lady. "Noble how?" D3 shrugged. "I don't remember if it's called noble because it's the least reactive metal or because it's extremely rare." "Extremely rare on Earth," the Time Lord said. "Correct," D3 acknowledged. "We are going to be arriving at the island soon, so prepare," Saber announced. Sully laughed. "What?" Saber asked. "So prepare. The drums are rum-tum-tumming over there." "What?" "The Yanks are coming." The retired Commodore grinned privately as he stared out at the shining silver sea, upon which Ruckus transported the group, never touching the surface, steam trailing far behind. Saber glanced back at Sully. "He may be having a stroke." Mr. Blue pointed. "All right, ease up, Ruckus. Take us down a notch." The Silver Rapids Collective slowed to a halt on a beach made of metal. The Time Agent and the Time Lord departed first, stepping onto the eerie, empty hulk of what must have been a well-maintained artificial island. No vegetation, simply several corrugated acres of now rusting metal. The sound of the silver sea near them echoed a strange sloshing noise, as whatever liquid metal lapped up to the dilapidated metal beach was clearly nothing like water. "Go on." Mr. Blue was staring at D3 as she departed Ruckus's ship form. She wiped her hands on Lagerfugel's shirt, then placed them on her hips, blowing hair from her eyes. "All right. Platinum has a higher melting point than most anything else. You can burn away most impurities before you'll melt the platinum. For instance, you need to break down a circuit board, but need to keep the main circuitry architecture." Their companion, the Silver Rapids Collective, changed shape. Enormous metallic arms and armor, jagged, sharp wire edges, and a massive steel cannon hulked about ahead of them. Mr. Blue sighed. "Yes, congratulations, Ruckus. You now have out of the doors surrounded." D3 blinked several times. "Do you need me to stop or—" The erratic Time Lord suddenly pointed to the middle of the metal island. "Hey, Atch! Leading down." Ruckus lumbered off in the warlike tank mode. Mr. Blue called after him. "For 7 L's, Ruckus! You'll impress no one like that." D3 shook her head as she watched Mr. Blue sprint after the now normal-sized silver humanoid form of Ruckus, followed by Saber and Sully. "I can't believe we're back here again," Fugel said. "Did I say stop?" the loud voice of Mr. Blue called after them. D3 started to walk, then shouted. "It's pretty resistant to hydrochloric and sulfuric acid." "Nobody cares about that." "You said—" The Time Lord in the cobalt suit waved dismissively. "I don't care what I said. Tell me about the magnetic properties." "You can combine about 2/3 platinum with 1/3 cobalt to make a functioning pertinent magnet." D3 finished as she caught up with him. Saber cleared away debris over a manhole with a latch. She wrenched it open, breaking through untold years of rust, opening it wide to reveal a staircase leading down. The Time Agent didn't wait for any kind of lead. She jumped down the hole, hitting the land about 20 feet below. She lit the small, gloomy space, which housed another doorway hatch. "All clear," she shouted above her. As the group made its way down the ladder, Saber had forced open the door and investigated the interior of the metal island. Mr. Blue was silent for a long time, even after entering the area. He wandered around the bizarre and ancient technology of this forgotten and entombed lab, then eventually stood next to the Time Agent, staring absently at where they were. "I had wondered when we would find it," the Time Lord said. Saber shook her head. You already knew Docker and Frost wouldn't be here. You knew exactly what we were going to discover. Mr. Blue was suddenly shouting. Didn't you? His yell echoed in the interior of the lab, silencing all, except D3. What's the problem? This is the exact lab where we first met Deceit on Rem in 2667. That's 100 years from now. D3 was confused. Quite. Mr. Blue took a big look around the components of Dolka's lab. After Deceit had taken the Sidrat parts, the Time Lord grimaced. So, it looks like Deceit basically copied and pasted Dolka and Frost from their lab from 2567 to Rem 2667. Saber nodded. No, how can that time bitch do that? Seriously? Sully asked Mr. Blue. The Time Lord ignored him. You already had this penned out the whole time. Why didn't you just tell me? Would it have mattered? The Time Agent's voice was impatient now. Keep in mind, Mr. Blue, I'm your colleague. I'm a Time Agent. I am not a Time Lord's companion, and there is a difference. You're missing the bigger question. What question is that? Saber looked at him. How? As your friend Sully asked, if Deceit stole this entire lab and transplanted it a century later on a different planet, then we're here in time to find out how. Loggish Fugel would not stop pestering D3 about some gold army headed their way. Leave me alone already. He drug his supervisor to the entry ladder and climbed up. You have to see this, please. D3 was momentarily caught off guard by seeing him implore her. All right, Jesus almighty, I'm coming already. Her head had barely cleared the hatch opening, and already she could see them. Thousands of golden men walking across the silver sea and headed their direction. Loggish stood, entranced by their shine. Why are they coming here now? D3 peered out. I'm not sure. The golden soldiers drew closer. They were now closing in on the beach. D3 panicked. Okay, they're very pretty and shiny gold, and walking on silver ocean like it. That is neat. But let's go inside now. Maybe they're here to help. You're kidding me, right? You can't possibly think that they're here to help, can you? Get in here now, D3 screamed. With trembling hands, she skittered down the ladder and ran back into the black and white, cobweb-strewn science lab that time forgot. They... She was out of breath. D3 bent over, struggling to inhale, her hands on her knees. The retired Commodore approached her. What's happening then, love? You all right? She forced herself upright and gasped. The gold rabbits, there. You knew there was going to be nothing here, and you used me. Mr. Blue sternly finished grumbling at Saber. He turned his dark azure eyes to D3. Golden rapids? They're collecting. Growing in size? What? No, they're out there. The golden soldiers are coming at us from all directions, walking across the silver sea. Saber finished D3's sentence. The Time Lord stared at her. Loggish Fugel had successfully completed the task of closing and sealing the ancient hatch, which he somehow knew would not hold on for long, and gotten back down the entry ladder, which would soon be filling with golden soldiers. He was beginning to shake. As he entered the lab, he heard the first pounding of the gold rapids on the hatch. He was going to announce this, but decided to keep his mouth shut when he saw the Silver Rapids Collective. Ruckus had gone yet again into war mode, standing behind the Time Lord. Stand down, Ruckus! Mr. Blue ordered. Saber slowly turned to face him. I apologize. Formally. For what? Saber growled in a quantum incantation, the trusted katana materializing in her fists. The Time Lord took a step back. Sorry for what, Saber? Ruckus edged closer behind him, trying to get nearer to the Time Agent. Mr. Blue turned, half facing Ruckus. Damn it, Silver Rapids Collective! I bloody well order you to step no further, or I will end your entire race myself! Mr. Blue returned his gaze to Saber. Her eyes turned silver. For what happens next? The ancient lab was filled with a deep, thunderous, inhuman groaning sound. A bright orchid brilliance blinded all inside the lab temporarily as an iris-colored wardrobe tore a path into existence through Ruckus, shattering, crushing, grinding and scattering the Silver Rapids Collective into countless jagged chunks and debris of the lab. No! Mr. Blue shouted. Sully uncovered his eyes and yelled, Ruckus! The Time Lord turned to face Saber, only to see her raising her sword at him. The Time Agent lashed outward. Mr. Blue instinctively arced backward, stumbling and falling. He did not notice the violet plasma bolt intended to behead him. Another blast of purple. This one seen by the Time Lord. He watched as Saber struck every orchid-colored electrical projectile away from him with superhuman speed. The Time Lord turned to face the direction from whence the sudden attack and the destruction of the Silver Rapids had originated. Deceit was keeping Saber busy with one hand, firing endless violet-hued energy blasts at the Time Agent with one EM wrench, while the other EM wrench in the other hand was doing something else. She was encapsulating someone in a field. Logus Fugel. Stop it! Mr. Blue suddenly stood and yelled, even as he flinched while behind the Time Agent, who was furiously stabbing and slashing away for protection against the violet onslaught. I have to leave you here, Saber yelled. I'm sorry. The Time Agent ran at Deceit, headlong. The renegade Time Lady was taken off guard for a brief moment, stopping her attack on Fugel. However, the instant before Saber made contact, she could see a tiny grin on Deceit's face as she trained both EM wrenches on the Time Agent, floating her in the air, then sending her crashing into a violet wardrobe. Mr. Blue watched Saber crash, then slide through the interior of the iris wardrobe-shaped TARDIS, skidding across the control room and through an open doorway into a white control room. The first purge interior, the Time Lord gasped. Watching his former self the first time he was aboard his time machine, he watched Mr. White typing at the controls, when he was suddenly and violently collided by Saber, Deceit using her EM wrenches to wield the Time Agent like a wrecking ball. Mr. Blue began to run towards the violet TARDIS, yet was only rewarded with a mocking smile from Deceit as she vanished. Inside the lab, D3 kept constantly asking him questions, over and over again. What is happening? Sully was able to calm the excited lady down, taking Mr. Blue aside. Tell me straight now, old boy. Give me the story on what's going on. The Time Lord slowly raised his wary head and stared into Sully's eyes. The retired Commodore could see, even feel the weight of time in this alien, this strange traveler in blue, this heroic friend of his. Mr. Blue looked around briefly. Saber is gone. Ruckus is destroyed. That's for starters. Does it get worse, chum? Without looking, the Time Lord pointed at Logus Fugel. The transformation's almost complete. Transformation? Into what? D3 looked at her former intern, no longer encased in a purple force field. Now, he was being enveloped by metallic wiring and cabling, only it was coming from inside him. Inside Logus Fugel, chrome and metallic, and almost silver in color. These extensive, intricate-looking pieces and fittings were tearing their way through and out of him, then attaching themselves to his exterior in jagged chunks. He was choking, crying, terrified, and dying, very, very slowly, and very, very painfully. Oh my god, what is happening to him? He's turning into a platinum rapid. The first to have a human intellect, Mr. Blue said. Sully shook his head and lit a cigarette. That cannot be good. It looks like he's in agony. Is he hurting that badly? D3 asked. Mr. Blue regarded Logus Fugel. No, it's, happening too fast. He can't feel anything. D3 knew he was lying. She appreciated it anyway. Mr. Blue paced, clenching his fist in frustration. Why in the bloody hell would she do this? The Time Lord looked at Sully. Gets better. This is the trap, and we were set up. Sully, we also have the gold rapids outside the hatchway, working on coming in at this very moment. D3 instinctively backed against a wall, as she had no idea on what else to do. Sully stood beside her, trying to give comfort. Mr. Blue leaned on the wall, cutting between them, muttering the situation. No temporal wrist device, no access to my bioship, stranded underground, golden soldiers about to attack from all sides. Trapped in here with the first platinum rapids to absorb consciousness. Ruckus, dead, Saber, MIA. He rubbed his eyes. I hate being a Time Lord. Chapter 0. Outside was chaos. The last great time war. Happening, and not happening. In a sickening, swirling, frenzy sway of existence and non-existence. This madness must stop. The temporal engineer made his way to his nearly complete bioship time capsule. He designated it an X for experimental and the 99X, risky new type of artificial intelligence. The ship, his ship, was made for someone else. He had spent the better part of a century, even after graduating from Praetor Engineering Guild, to build this ship, to create her, to craft her. She was his, and it was time to leave. Capes Ilonekorkvez Traveler placed the watch on his wrist, which he had stolen back in Minor Arcadia. The great museums of Gallifrey were empty now, not so much as the Imperial Guard. Unless he wanted to stay here forever with an endless suffering, the engineer knew he had to save himself, even if that meant stealing a rare, difficult-to-replicate temporal wrist device, an IO-TARDIS tool, which could emulate a sonic screwdriver, an EM wrench, a laser cutter, a mag left clamp, an ion grapple, a neutral ram, a transverser, a pen torch, and a chronometer. The stranger in white entered the dim, small control room in the time machine. Lights. The IO-TARDIS sprung to brilliant luminescence, and the room expanded as the stranger in white closed the doors behind him. An alarm sounded, reminding the engineer to withdraw a strange piece of equipment, the Bryod nebulizer, and input it into his bioship's controls. A gender-neutral voice intoned gently from overhead. Please enter temporal unique identifier signature. The temporal engineer ran his fingers through his very dark hair, his tired eyes lost in thought, as he stared at what he built. A cloister bell in the distance, as well as the heavy sound of an impact tremor nearby, were constant sounds, ambient background to the engineer since the Time War had started. He was unfazed by these things, so lost in thought, he did not notice the iris-colored wardrobe materializing behind him. He began typing P-E-R. The stranger in white was knocked to the other side of the room by an impact he was completely unready for. He saw two women fighting, one clothed in a black bodysuit, the other in a dark violet dress. Saber stomped kicked Deceit back into the purple TARDIS as the temporal engineer struggled to enter E-C-T before the window of the nebulizer disappeared. A female voice from overhead now. Setup incomplete. Enter interim Bryod nebulizer username. Capes Ilonekorkvez Traveler. Saber groaned as she stood. A stunned stranger in white stared back at her. No! Damn it! No! 7 hells, that was not the name I was supposed to use. Suddenly, Purge's voice, for the first time, echoed over the pair of them. Input accepted. Hello, I am Purject, your Type 99 time capsule. Deceit tackled Saber from behind, violently slamming her face into the floor repeatedly, denting the chrome. Mr. White scrambled to figure out the defensive controls as Purge softly announced overhead. You are an insufficient operator. There is violence on the bridge. Dispatching countermeasures. Why won't you just die? Deceit cackled, stomping into the time agent ruthlessly. Saber grabbed her legs. Because you can't kill a fixed point. Then swung the renegade time lady into a stone pillar, crushing her so hard it collapsed, falling into rubble, filling the room with dust, and leaving Deceit motionless on the floor. I should have barely just enough time, the time agent said, hurrying to Purge's control console. She typed in coordinates, locking onto a temporal wave arc. Excuse me, Mr. White protested. Just who do you think you're— No time, dear Time Lord. No time. Saber sadly grinned, wiping bright orange blood from her lip, as Purge opened an emergency void warp transport arc, blasting Saber, Deceit, and the violet TARDIS to another time and place. As the void warp snapped shut, the fire switch sparked on the console died, and silence suddenly consumed the massive control room. Capes Ilonekorkvez Traveler stood alone on the bridge of his temporal bioship, looking around at the destruction wrought already. I haven't even left Gallifrey yet. Engaging coordinates, Purge echoed. What? I didn't input any Temporal nexus point, Earth, North American continent, United States, Illinois, Schloscott Air Force Base Graveyard. Time lock, autumn 1997 current era. The time machine finished her statement, and Mr. White felt the sensation of materializing on a different world. He took a deep breath. Where did you send the other two in their TARDIS? Exactly 1 year from this moment. Opposite side of this graveyard. Systems damages? Mr. White asked. HATS program is non-operational. Hostile active defense systems are gone? The stranger in white shouted. Universal translation matrix at 67%, Purge continued. That is just wizard. How much worse will it get? As if mocking him, the temporal bioship answered in a perfectly neutral intercom voice. Chameleon circuit functioning at 33%. The stranger in white groaned in response. And there is an incoming temporal Mordor signature, Purge finished. On screen. Mr. White looked at the hologram, showing some goth girl putting on lipstick, walking home from school, it appeared, through the graveyard. Temporal hiccups, the engineer said. Stop being so paranoid.